looking and we're working with municipalities to develop a bylaw. Some tools that we would develop a bylaw, hand it off to municipalities, and they would consider passing that to mandate that there be sufficient space for recycling activities in buildings.
Thank you very much for joining us today. My name is Peter Holt, and I'm your moderator for today's dialogue. The multifamily residential sector has a much lower diversion rate than the region as a whole. This sector also faces unique challenges such as shared garbage bins and limited space for adding containers to collect recyclable or organics materials. However, with the majority of our growing population expected to live in multifamily dwellings in the future, it is an opportune time to explore questions such as: how do we actually accelerate waste diversion in this sector? What barriers exist to accelerate waste diversion, and how do we address them? We have 7 distinguished panelists. We're going to lead off with Ken Karuska. Ken is the Division Manager for the Integrated Planning Division at Metro Vancouver. And in this capacity, he's one of the lead staff members on the Zero Waste Challenge. Ken.
Thank you. Well, again, thank you for attending. Maybe just to back up a little bit, the topic is obviously multifamily waste diversion. The Metro Vancouver Board, the entire region, has adopted the Solid Waste Management Plan. That plan right now is with the Provincial Minister of Environment for approval. A lot of the discussion and dialogue on that plan last year was on what to do with the residue, the stuff that's left over after we get to 70 or as we get to 80%, which is our aspirational goal. What we want to talk about, and a big part of that plan, is how can we really change all of our behaviors and emphasize the first 3 R's, the waste reduction, reuse, and recycling. Again, get those materials out of disposal. Now, as we move down, the multifamily sector, again, highlighted as one of the key areas that we need to focus on. Overall, the region is recycling 55%, and 16%, that's room for improvement, as I think we say these days. So let's get to it. In multifamily diversion, waste diversion, and recycling, what are some of the challenges? What we've identified, and collectively we work with, Metro Vancouver works with municipalities, outside groups, to identify some of the challenges. And some of the challenges directly are the limited space available for recycling activities in multifamily dwellings, multifamily buildings, townhomes, high-rises, etc. The limited access, again, the access for residents, access for trucks, vehicles to get to those materials. And collectively, one of the issues, the anonymity with a multifamily resident. Those are some of the challenges. What are we as Metro Vancouver looking to do? We're looking and we're working with municipalities to develop a bylaw. Some tools that we would develop a bylaw, hand it off to municipalities, and they would consider passing that to mandate that there be sufficient space for recycling activities in buildings. We're also working to develop a bylaw that, in fact, again, same thing, would be passed over to municipalities to actually mandate, not just the space, but mandate that recycling needs to be carried out in multifamily buildings. And beyond that, so you can mandate space, you can mandate that people, all of us, participate. Now, at the tail end, we're also looking at what type of enforcement activities we need to do. And in terms of enforcement, it's spot checks, if you will, it's on collection, and also when those materials, when the garbage goes to disposal, that remaining 30%, to make sure that there aren't recyclables, materials that can be diverted in that stream. So 3 steps is what we're talking about: a bylaw for space allocation, a bylaw to mandate recycling, and number 3, some type of enforcement. That's it in a nutshell. Again, lots of discussion that we're looking forward to being a part of with municipalities, and again, many of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken. Next is Tony Giaventu. Tony is the Executive Director for the Condominium Homeowners Association, a non-profit association that's been assisting strata owners since 1976. Tony. Sorry about the chair.
Thanks, Peter. It's an interesting thing when you look back at the history of multifamilies in British Columbia. Around the mid-1960s, we started stratifying townhouses. We started creating apartment buildings that were stratified. We started growing to higher density within our communities. Since that time, we've grown now to almost 700,000 strata properties in the province. We have 27,000 strata corporations, and there are literally thousands of variations of buildings. An interesting point that we're seeing now, of course, is many of our properties are now reaching their 50-year age mark, and they're now looking at major upgrades and major construction. And there are some great opportunities now to be looking at introducing better use of their space or increased requirements on their space with respect to their use of administration, with their resource management, for waste management, and for diversion as well. And buildings have very different uses and expectations of their property. Townhouse complexes and bare land stratas, duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes, there's often an accommodation for space, for waste management, and for recycling of materials. There are resources for individuals to store materials. There are resources for individuals to take responsibility. When we move to higher density in high rises, and we move to higher density on locations where there's limited parking, there's no common space for composting. There's not a significant amount of space for recycling bins and for the recycling totes that are necessary. We then shift into the higher level of anonymity within communities, and the obvious choice is if you don't have enough bins, it's just as easy to tip it in. So consumers tend to take the easier road in most of the communities. Many of the older communities that we have, especially with the multifamilies, apartment buildings, they lack fire suppression systems in their undergrounds. So adding or increasing their storage space for combustible materials that may be used for diversion and fire is simply not a feasible or a safe or a wise choice for them to make without significant upgrades. Clearly, the biggest role and the biggest opportunity that we all have in partnership is to educate our multifamily communities on how to organize and upgrade their facilities. The physical environments, more attractive garbage rooms. Garbage rooms aren't that sexy, right? So how do you make the garbage rooms more attractive? Better lighting, better ventilation, a simple paint job on most of them. Many of them don't have floor drains with respects to being able to continue a level of maintenance and sanitation in the rooms. So they come to the point where they're not very attractive. Volunteer programs, certainly, whether it's a community plan with multiple stratas or a single strata corporation, those that have had great successes have isolated and identified a team captain or a champion within their communities who's really going to coordinate the work that has to be done, coordinate the facilities, educate their owners, a mentoring program as a model community, a website where you can go on to a model community and look at how they've managed to convert into all of the recycling and all the facilities and all the upgrades and the initiatives that are possible. Anything that we can direct people to on a large basis would be really great. Two simple questions that the community have asked. We did a number of surveys since the first session with 4 different types of buildings in the Metro Vancouver area, and they had 2 things that they really wanted more than anything. One was something to deal with polystyrene and clamshells. Just simply get it out of the system, because what's happening is their recycling facilities are getting jammed with styrofoam, and as the result, people are just diverting everything else into the waste. So that's a significant problem. And then, of course, the other thing is absolutely, just give us minimum standards for diversion rates, and that'll work for us. So lots to talk about, lots of opportunities, and thank you for coming out today.
Thank you very much, Tony. Next is Marg Gordon. Marg is the Chief Executive Officer of the BC Apartment Owners and Managers Association. Marg is a former city councillor and has extensive experience in the non-profit rental housing sector, as well as sales and marketing. Marg, pardon me.
Thanks. Good afternoon, everybody. I can say ditto to pretty much everything that Tony just said, because condos and apartment buildings have the same issues. So what I'd like to move on to is further to voice some opinions on what does this mean to our apartment buildings. Well, there's been a lot of talk about limited space, limited accessibility, where are we going to get the room for the extra bins, and there's been some talk at the other dialogues that one of the opportunities is parking. But we need to think about that, because under the parking, if we're going to reduce our amount of parking that's available to our tenants, under the Residential Tenancy Act, we are mandated, if we take away a service, to compensate a tenant. So that's not an easy solution. Our association and our sector provides 1 in 3 British Columbians their homes. In Vancouver, 1 in 2. So we really have to think about the financials and the economics of what we're asking to happen here. So if we're going to mandate specific space, then let's ensure that everybody dialogues around how are we going to get that space. Some of the solutions that we've talked about is in multifamily residences where the average age of the buildings are 57 years old. These are old buildings that were built in narrow lanes. We didn't think about recycling 57 years ago. So what about shared space? What about looking at an area that zones specifically multifamily and there's a number of buildings? Is there municipal land available? Could the municipalities or the local government, could they provide training, equipment, and operational expenses towards running this? Are there ways that the solutions could be more far-reaching than just saying, what were the 3? Mandate specific space. We need to talk about what that really means. And the affordability. Mandate that you have to recycle. How are we going to do that? And enforcement. That really worries me because we have split incentives when we're talking about apartment owners. We have what the landlord can do and we have what the tenant can do. And we need to figure out how those different incentives are going to appeal to both groups. So if I have my main message is it's got to be affordable. If we're looking at regulation and government intervention, we need to work together to see how this can work. And as the Apartment Association, we have great reach throughout the province and throughout the Metro Vancouver area. We can reach out, we can help with the solutions, we can message our landlords, we can have them message their tenants, we can join these types of dialogues. And in the end, we want to be a part of the solution, so we're here to help. Thank you. How long did I take?
Next, we have Peter Judd. Peter is General Manager of Engineering Services at the City of Vancouver. A professional engineer, Peter oversees a department of 1,800 employees who provide public works design, construction, and maintenance services. Peter's held a number of positions with the city, including General Manager of the Olympic and Paralympic operations. Peter.
Thanks, Peter. There's an echo in here. Space is not a problem. Jobs are up in Vancouver. Population is up in Vancouver. The number of trips into Vancouver is up. Automobile trips into Vancouver are down. Automobile ownership in Vancouver is down. That means space is available. I can't tell you, every developer that comes in, except for Robin, that comes in wants to build more space than is actually required at $60,000 a space. So not only is space not a problem, money is not a problem. And I would submit that the problem is in priorities. And I suspect also that this also applies in existing developments where parking has been built to accommodate a need that no longer exists. Now in Vancouver, I think there's a fundamental problem around enforcement and accountability. You can address this in residential. You can see what people are putting in the can and you can deal with it. You cannot do that in multifamily. And I think the problem we have in multifamily in Vancouver, I don't know what it's like elsewhere, but it's fragmented. City is responsible for the recycling. Contractor is responsible for the garbage. How do you hold anybody accountable? But I have a solution. In San Jose, they require and they achieve a 35% diversion rate from multifamily. How do they do that? They do that because they've taken the city and they've taken areas and they franchise all of the collection. So they contract out the collection for that area with specific performance requirements, and their requirement is a 35% reduction, which they achieve. The property owners, the unit occupier is not responsible for that, and will never be able to make them totally accountable for that anyway. So make the collector accountable. If they can't achieve the collection at the collection end, then they have to achieve it downstream with separation of the garbage that they collect. And they do that. Yes, it costs more, but they do it. They achieve it. So getting into opportunities, I think for the city, that is a primary opportunity. We have to get some changes made to the charter to allow us to do that, but I think that helps us make a lot of good changes on this issue and some other issues. What else? Parking I've mentioned. One opportunity here that I think is key is the issue of economic development. There's a whole host of green jobs that we currently are not capitalizing on the downstream end of this. We've got to treat garbage like a resource. I mean, zero waste has to mean zero waste. We take whatever, mine every resource that we possibly can out of the things that people are throwing away. The rest of it, we extract as much energy as we possibly can from it, and we use whatever residuals there are from that for some other practical use, whether it's road building or fill or concrete or whatever it is. We can do this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. Next, we have Ralph Wells. Ralph is the Sustainability Manager for the University Neighbourhoods Association, an organisation that provides municipal services to the residents in 5 residential neighbourhoods in the University of British Columbia. Ralph has a master's degree from the School of Resource and Environmental Management at SFU. Ralph.
Thanks, Peter. Hello, I'm here to share a couple of local success stories related to our multifamily organics program, and share some interesting results we got from a recent waste audit. But before I do that, I should probably just briefly say a little bit about who we are. University Neighborhoods Association provides municipal services to 5 new residential neighborhoods up at the University of British Columbia. We're about 3,000 homes now, over 7,000 residents, and growing rapidly, about 10% a year. And one key feature is that we are entirely multifamily, from townhouses through low-rises and high-rises. Talk a little bit about our organics program and our waste audit. In 2005, we started a pilot project with the University of British Columbia, who has their own organics composting facilities, to do some trials in a couple of our residential buildings, and it's now grown to over 1,200 homes, which is about 40% of our homes, and we were able to divert over 64 tons of organics last year. Moving on to our waste audit. Last year we partnered with UBC to do a campus-wide waste audit. We sampled 4 buildings over a period of a week. It was a bit of a snapshot. We did townhouse, a couple of low-rises and high-rises. Our diversion rate, folks, was 40 to 50%. We were really surprised by that, and we're very pleased, obviously. The other thing is we found, I think as others find, that about half of our remaining waste stream is organics, and about 80% is recyclable, divertible under the current programs without making a single change. The potential is there. And of course, we're very happy about that organics number, because that means if we really focus on organics, we should be able to up our diversion rates. And I guess just to wrap up, looking forward, we're quite serious about developing programs to get our multifamily towards 70%. And to close, I'd say, I know that around the region, municipalities are starting to really look at piloting organics programs in multifamily, and I'm not going to pretend there aren't challenges there, but I'm going to say, you can do it. It's possible. And finally, I think our diversion numbers say that we should all be expecting, to see that 16% go up, that 40, 50% is achievable. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Up next is Robin Petrie, Director of Land Development with Park Lane Homes. Robin currently works on the development East Fraserlands, a 130-acre complete community in the southeast corner of Vancouver. Robin has a Master of Environmental Engineering degree from the University of BC and is a LEED certified professional engineer. Robin.
Thanks, it's good to be here. So I'm here to represent the developers' interests. We, as developers, spend our days dealing with the design, construction, and the sale of buildings and also of community infrastructure. We, just like I think everybody else on this panel, really want to be part of the solution, as you do too. Some of the ideas that we have of what we can bring to the table are ways that we can incorporate into the new buildings and into the new infrastructure. Some of the ideas that you've heard already are challenges with the existing buildings. So one piece that's really a no-brainer, and I've heard it already raised here, is just setting aside this space in the units themselves, but also in the underground parking for three-stream waste collection. There are other ideas, though, as well. One is putting composters and incorporating composters into your building right from the outset and into your landscaping plan so that your residents, just at the building scale, have an opportunity and see that full feedback loop where they can bring their organics down, convert it into compost, and then use it right there in their building. And another idea on the sort of more high-tech end of the spectrum is, and there are a number of products that are sold. It's vacuum pipes that you put into the street, and it's a system of pipes all through a community that takes the waste to a central location in that community where it would be picked up by a truck. But on the other end of these vacuum pipes, they come up at each building so that you would go down to your underground parking or just to out your front door at grade. They have these, like I said, in Dubai, where they have many crazy things, but they also have them all through Spain. And I know Peter Judd said he saw them somewhere in Spain. So you would come down, there'd be an entrance point, you'd put in whatever, again, sort of like the chute, whatever type of waste you had, you press a button and it gets sucked to this central location. So again, just ways to sort of try and make it easier for people. But what I want to mention, and particularly coming at this from the developer's perspective, is all of these ideas have a cost implication. So we can't keep layering on all these cool ideas onto our developments, particularly in the era that we live in now. These projects have to be successful. We have to sell these units. We have to keep the cost of the consumer down. And we also have to have it have a business case so that their developers continue to exist and this industry continues to exist. So we got to watch the costs. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Robin. Finally, last but not least, we have Michael Geller, President of the Geller Group and Adjunct Professor with SFU Centre for Sustainable Community Development. Michael is an architect, planner, real estate consultant and property development with over 4 decades of experience in the public, private and institutional sectors. Michael.
Just a couple of thoughts. I think we need to distinguish between existing buildings and new buildings. And as I think we've heard, in the case of existing buildings, one of the real challenges is that the space was never built into those buildings 57 years ago. And as Mark correctly points out, parking is oftentimes at a premium, but not always, because many apartment buildings do in fact have empty parking spaces, especially if the city allows very inexpensive street parking just outside the building, which, as many of you know, often happens. And so I would encourage municipal officials to allow those landlords who are willing to reduce the number of parking spaces in order to expand their recycling facilities to do so. And I would also hope that at the same time, as Tony pointed out, that they will refit those garbage rooms so that they no longer feel like part of the twilight zone, but indeed become places where you actually don't mind spending a few minutes. And maybe by putting a little TV in there, you could actually change people's attitudes towards recycling. In the case of new buildings, one of the real problems is that some municipalities actually include the size of the garbage room in the floor space ratio calculation for the building. In other words, if you want to add 100 square feet to the garbage room, you essentially have to remove 100 square feet from the apartments that you're selling at $700 a foot. So it would be very simple for every municipality in Metro Vancouver to overnight change its regulations so that the size of garbage rooms no longer counts in the floor space ratio. Just a couple of final thoughts. In addition to accommodating recyclables in the waste room, we also have to recognize many of the apartments that are being built are terribly small. So where do you store recyclables in your own apartment? Well, sadly, many developers do not put little lazy Susans in all those corner cabinets. I suspect there's a few people in this room who have a corner cabinet low down that is almost dead space. So maybe somebody just needs to come up with a little unit that can go in there with a door so that you can separate your garbage, keep it in there in tight plastic containers, and do that. So in conclusion, yes, some of this is changing some regulations, and yes, some of this is attitude, but I do believe that we are heading in the right direction on this one, and I too look forward to the conversation.